And we're off. Okay, so thank you for joining me this evening to learn about the salamanders of the Ottawa district. So there's, I'll show you at the end. In 1981, Dr. Francis Cook, former curator emeritus at the Canadian Museum of Nature, published an article in Trail and Landscape. I'll show this on the screen better when it's bigger and not shared. But it was an article covering all the amphibians and reptiles of the Ottawa district and everything that was known to them up to that point. We've learned a few things since 1981, but what's interesting is that we haven't discovered any new salamander species in the area since then. We have learned more about them, and we have improved our knowledge of their distribution quite a bit, but no new species has been found, which is not true for some of the other classes. Anyway, salamanders, we should start, I suppose, by talking about what they are. Salamanders are amphibians. Amphibian as a word means of two lives. It refers to the fact that amphibians' life cycles involve time in both aquatic and terrestrial environments. And obviously in modern usage, something that is amphibious is something that can move easily between water and land. An amphibian is a vertebrate, just like reptiles and birds and mammals, but they're non-amniotic. Now what that means is that there's an evolutionary leap between the amphibians and the ones that are amniotic, or the amniotes. Amniotes are reptiles, birds, and mammals. They're more closely related, and amphibians are more, they're an older order. They're more primitive, so to speak. That's based on reproduction. Amniotic, or it refers to the the presence of an amniotic sac or an eggshell, because an eggshell is in effect structurally, functionally the same as an amniotic sac, and I guess that's enough about birthy things. But amphibians predate that evolutionarily. And within the amphibians, there are three major groups: the anurans, which are the frogs and toads; the salamanders, which we're going to talk about more; and a group called caecilians, which are these weird burrowing worm-like amphibians found in tropical places. We are not going to talk about those at all because they're weird and underground and not here. Now, the salamander originates from a Persian word. It isn't a Persian word, it's modified over time, but the origin of the word means born of fire. And if any of you have spent time in Europe or are familiar with amphibians in Europe, you may have heard of the fire salamander, one of the more common species in Europe. The reason for this term and this name is because a lot of salamanders live in logs on the forest floor. And what used to happen, and may still, is that people would be collecting wood for a campfire. They'd throw this log on the fire, and the salamander, of course, living inside the log, would not want to be in the fire. So it would escape from the log and run away. But to the people watching the fire, they just saw this creature running out of the fire. So there was some belief that they were literally being born in the fire, hence fire salamander, or for the common name today, hence the origin of the word. Most amphibians, including most salamanders, return to water when it's time to breed. So when they live on, some salamanders are aquatic, which we'll get to. Some salamanders live most of their life on land, but most of those still need to go back to water to breed, much like frogs do. However, What's different is that they have internal fertilization. Frogs, when they lay eggs in the pond in the springtime, the female just lays the eggs, which are already developed, into the pond, and the male fertilizes them while holding onto her. It's an external fertilization. The male sperm passes through the water to the eggs. It's similar to what a lot of fish do. In salamanders, what's different is that the female doesn't lay the eggs right away. The male produces something called a spermatophore. He leaves this packet of sperm cells on the bottom of the pond, and a female picks it up with her butt, as one does, and then that fertilizes the eggs, and then she proceeds to lay the eggs in the pond. Salamander diversity in the world is actually centered in North America. There are about 400 species in the world. The number fluctuates. There's different taxonomic approaches to things. So some organizations might recognize different numbers of species than other organizations. There's some disputes, and this is 3 species, no, it's 2 with a subspecies, etc. But there's around 400 species in the world, but 130 of them are actually found in the United States. And the highest diversity of salamanders anywhere in the world is in the Appalachian mountain range of the eastern United States. It's not that far away from us. Despite the fact that we're very, very close to this biodiversity hotspot for salamanders, we only have 7 species in our area. Eastern Canada, more broadly, at one time had 13 species. I have it saying at one time, or it once had 13 species, because at least one of these is extirpated today. The eastern tiger salamander has been recorded from the southwestern Ontario area near Point Pelee. The specimen that still exists was actually collected by Percy Taverner, a fairly well-known birder and OFNC member. That, however, was the last time that tiger salamander was found in Ontario and in eastern Canada. That species inhabits tallgrass prairies, 99% of which no longer exist. And the few that do are small and fragmented. So it's not really a surprise in a sense that we've extirpated that species, but it's unfortunate. There are some others that have been reduced in range and extent, but none of those are really found in our area. Although in some cases you don't have to go too far for the species count to change. Anyway, in a sense, it's easy for us today because we've only got 7 different types to talk about. Now, I mentioned right at the beginning that, you know, a lot of people come and tell me that they've never seen a salamander, and I'm guessing that for many of you tonight, that's true. You may have never seen one, or you may have seen one once, or by accident, or only occasionally. You may wonder what's going on with these. So where are the salamanders? Different species have different habitat preferences, but primarily they're found in forests, in wetlands, and in streams. In spring, most of the species gather to breed in ephemeral ponds. Again, like a lot of frogs that do the same thing. So when you hear spring peepers or chorus frogs in the springtime, those same ponds may also be breeding ponds for salamanders. It's not as obvious because the salamander activity occurs largely at night, and salamanders don't make noise. Frogs announce their presence. Frogs in most of our area are well surveyed and well understood. Most species, we have a very good handle on where they are because at least at one time in the year, at least one time in the year, they literally shout, "I'm here," with a unique call that we can use to identify them. Salamanders, though, are secretive and nocturnal, and they don't give us the pleasure, so we don't know as much about them, and our knowledge isn't as thorough or extensive, if you will. So I guess that's the next point I have here. thing is, even throughout the year, even when they're not breeding, most of the time, when you see salamanders, if you see salamanders, it will be at night if they're out on the surface. If you go for a walk in a forest on a warm, rainy night, or at the right time of year, a cold, rainy night, with a flashlight, if you look carefully, you may spot salamanders moving about on the forest floor or climbing low shrubs or small trees while they forage for their prey. It's generally weather that people don't like to be out in. Most people don't go out at night. Most people don't go out when it's raining. So most people really, really don't go out when it's nighttime and it's raining. So right there, we just don't run into each other very much. The other way they get seen is when a cover object under which the salamander is hiding is moved. You lifted up a board or a log or a rock in the right habitat, and underneath there was a salamander. That's actually one of the simplest ways to look for them, is to go searching an appropriate habitat by turning over cover objects. In salamander habitat, generally speaking, wherever they live, moist microclimates are important. So in a dry forest, there may still be salamanders, or at a time of year where it's dry generally, like the middle of July and it hasn't rained in a while, the forest floor might be quite dry, but there will be microhabitats that are still retaining moisture. In a lot of cases, what we're talking about is a large rotting log lying on the ground. That's a place that you'll end up having salamanders congregate because they're amphibians and they need to maintain a certain amount of moisture so they don't desiccate and dry out. Like all amphibians, salamanders have a mucous membrane on their skin, and they absorb a lot through their skin, including water and oxygen. So they have to be careful not to dry out. Unlike reptiles, which have scaly skin that can help protect them from moisture loss. So in a forested habitat, key features are rotting logs, other woody debris that provides cover and retains moisture, and leaf litter. Lots of leaf litter is good. These aren't important just because of moisture retention, but also because this is where the food is coming from for the salamanders. They don't eat the leaf litter, they eat invertebrates, little bugs and slugs and springtails and things like this that are in the leaf litter digesting it. So something I want to touch on before I get too far in. Oh yes, this is a log. It's a cut piece of a red maple lying in a forest. There's some Pennsylvania sedge here because it was a sunnier spot, some leaf litter. There were 3 redback salamanders under this log. That's what a cover object looks like. Just like that. If you do start looking for these, you may find that you turn a lot of stuff over and don't see anything at all. And that's normal. You do need to have some patience and some persistence. And with time, you get more of a sense of feeling, if you will, about which cover objects are better or not. Sometimes they can be too fresh, sometimes they can be too old, too large, too small, too wet, too dry. Depends on the species and the situation. But anyway, in basic terms, that's what we're talking about. That might just look like junk on the forest floor. And, you know, in the middle of the 20th century, conventional thinking in forest management was that stuff like this needed to be cleaned up. That's a mistake. If forests are cleaned too much and they lose standing dead trees and fallen dead trees and woody debris like this stuff is moist, it's decomposing, it's returning nutrients to the soil, but it's also important habitat for salamanders, which are important, very important ecologically to the entire forest ecology, which I'll talk about a little bit more. If already, or because of this presentation, you feel inclined to start looking more often for salamanders, or looking at all, there are some things I want to mention, and these are important. If you are searching for salamanders, it's important to always minimize your disturbance of the habitat. Good salamander habitat, like good habitat of any kind these days, is hard to find, and it's limited in size, and it's fragmented, and there's a lot of pressure on it, especially now. I imagine many of you have tried to go somewhere in the green belt on the weekend lately, and it's pretty busy. Nobody going there may be doing anything wrong, but just the sheer volume of that is a pressure on the habitat and a pressure on the wildlife. So always be cognizant of your own impact and try and limit it, minimize it. If you know that a log or a rock is too heavy for you to move safely, don't move it. If it's really wedged in the ground, don't move it. If it's going to break apart because you're pulling it up because it's so rotten, don't do it. You're tearing apart the house of potentially salamanders and all sorts of other creatures. So when I'm surveying for salamanders, I try to choose cover objects that I can move easily and safely, and that I can replace after I look, so that I put everything back the way it was. So you always want to replace any cover object you do lift up exactly how it was. Now, there's two kind of asterisks that come with that. The first, of course, is you want to minimize the handling of any salamander you find. If you need to pick up a salamander, you don't want to do it for any longer than you need to. And basically, because, I mean, it's a small animal, you lifted a house off of it, it was probably sleeping, and now it's in your hand and you're a giant. It's a frightening experience. And more than that, you don't want anything from you to transfer to it. So if you have any lotions on at all, you really shouldn't be touching amphibians, period. If you wear bug spray at all, it's important to never, ever, ever handle an amphibian, especially a salamander. There's many, many cases of salamanders dying immediately or within minutes because they've come into contact with DEET, a common insect repellent, on somebody's hand. Salamanders are long-lived animals, believe it or not, and you know, just because you saw it and touched it, for it to die, that's obviously not something that anyone desires. So if you are looking and you do have to move them, don't have anything on your hands. Don't wear bug spray. And you know, some biologists now are actually moving to a protocol where they actually wear disposable gloves anytime they handle them. It's even more important if you handle large numbers of them and move between populations so that you're not transferring disease. For the casual observer, that's not really a significant risk. Now, having said that, if you do find a salamander under something you've lifted up, it's important that you don't just plop it right back down on top. They've usually wedged themselves under the log or the rock, or they have a little crevice. And if they've moved at all because they've been disturbed, when you put that back down, you could be crushing them. They are vertebrates, they have bones, and they're vulnerable to being crushed. And that's a problem. So the good practice is when you do find one, is to, if they don't voluntarily run for cover at the edges of the imprint of the log or whatever, it's a good idea to gently encourage them out from under the cover, replace the cover exactly how it was, and then gently encourage them to go hide back underneath. That way they're not out somewhere vulnerable to predation back under their cover object, but you were able to replace it without actually physically crushing them. It is discouraging on the few times it has happened, but discouraging to lift up a promising looking cover object to find that there's something under there that has been crushed by someone previously. That's not nice. So it's kind of common sense. Be careful, minimize disturbance, you know, leave things as it was, as they were when you found them, and don't get anything on the skin of these animals. So now this isn't what I just described. We'll start talking about the actual species now. There's one species in our area that is completely aquatic, and searching for it looks like this. Yes, that is ice in the background. I think it was -20 when I took this photo. Many of you may have heard of the mud puppy. It is the largest salamander in our area, the largest extant salamander species in Eastern Canada. And it's fully aquatic, and it lives in streams and rivers and sometimes lakes. And one of the best places to observe mud puppies is actually very close to us here. Oxford Mills, a small town near Kemptville, has a dam with a shallow stream bed below it. And in the wintertime, for some reason, mud puppies congregate at this area. And two OFNC members, biologists, Fred Schuler and Alida Karstad, have been doing a long-term survey of the mud puppy population at this site. It's really the only place in the province of Ontario that has reliable mud puppy data over time. Any other time they turn up, it's a happy accident. So usually when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, throughout the winter on Friday at 8 o'clock, you can go to Oxford Mills and go down and help count the mud puppies. And we've organized official club outings there in the past, and I'm sure we will in the future once things normalize for us. But it's actually an amphibian you can see best in the wintertime. We believe that they mate in the wintertime, but the mating ritual, if you will, of the mud puppies has never been observed or recorded. So still waiting to be documented. We know what the other species do in that interaction, but not mud puppies. These are mud puppies in a bucket. I apologize, they're in a bucket. It's hard to get a photograph of these otherwise, but they're quite large. This is a pretty typical 10-gallon pail here. What you can see, and I believe you can see when I move my mouse because it's a screen share. So at night, you have this brown animal with the black spots. These red feathery things here are their gills. Mud puppies have gills that they retain throughout their lives. Most salamanders do have gills in their larval stage and then lose them later on. But mud puppies, being a fully aquatic species, retain gills. Mud puppies from sites with very well oxygenated water are known to have smaller gills, and mud puppies from sites with less well oxygenated or oxygen levels that are poor have larger gills with more branches to give them more surface area to absorb oxygen. It's an interesting sort of dynamic change that they make depending on where they're living. If you see these in bright light, they are nocturnal. They're not usually out in bright light. They look pinkish and translucent. Not completely, but you still see the color and the spots as you see it here, but they're not really built to be in sunlight because they never really are. They're quite large. They're quite placid most of the time when they get scooped into these buckets. I've never seen them lash out at all. There's some large aquatic salamander species in the southern US that are well known for biting very aggressively, but these don't. Now this is a sort of a dot distribution map of where they're found in our area today. These maps that I'm showing you are from Ontario Nature's Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas project. They've recently wrapped up data collection and they'll be publishing something shortly, the same way that bird breeding atlases do. And the red squares indicate sightings that are 20 years old or older. The yellow squares indicate sightings that are within the last 20 years only. And the green squares are squares where we have long-term data. So data observations that are older than 20 years and newer than 20 years. So as you can see, they're believed to be present in most water bodies connected by rivers in this area, but most of this, there are no records. Most of the places where there are records, they're red squares. In most cases, these are single historical records where someone has found a dead one washed up, come across one by accident, or the most common incidental way of finding a mud puppy, ice fishing. Ice fishers will often, well, not often, but on occasion will catch a mud puppy because they're active in the wintertime. And a lot of the time people don't know what they are. Kind of freak them out. And sometimes people claim they found some sort of missing link in evolution. They've never seen this before. Anyway, they're certainly throughout the Ottawa River, the Rideau River system. They're found throughout the St. Lawrence River, the freshwater St. Lawrence River, and the Great Lakes. And they're quite interesting species, but they're actually not one I should be giving this much time to, because unless you go to mud puppy night, you probably are not going to encounter one. Now, this is something that you may encounter if you turn over a log in a forest. And in fact, this may be something that you even see walking around in the forest in daylight. This is the only salamander species that I've seen just walking around in the daytime when it's not raining. The reason it does that is the same reason that it's bright orange. It's poisonous. Of course, that means that if you eat it, you die. It's different than something that's venomous, which bites or stings you. But something that's poisonous is just something that's toxic if it's eaten, and the bright color advertises that. This is the aft stage of the red spotted newt. Newts have 3 life stages. They have, I guess 4 technically. They have an egg and a larval stage, after which they have this stage, this terrestrial stage that they live in for 3 to 4 years. It's kind of like the teenagers of the newt world. They have this warty skin. They live on land in dry environments, and after they finish being teenagers, so to speak, they go back to ponds or streams or lakes and become their adult form, which is primarily aquatic, although they are still able to leave the water and they do have lungs. The red spotted newt is fairly well distributed across our region, but something you might notice is the southern area of Ottawa. There's a lot of places without records, and that's still true today, and that was true in 1981, Francis Cook's original report. They're found throughout forested areas on the Canadian Shield, the Frontenac Arch, forested areas to the east of us. But, you know, they are apparently absent from this swath south of Ottawa. Not really sure why, and they could well be there and they just haven't been found. Now let me just check the chat here for a second. All right. Okay, yep. All right. Okay, so I mentioned turning cover objects. Jonathan Mack mentions a word of caution that wasps sometimes make their nests under cover. Yeah, that does happen from time to time. I've found yellow jacket nests. That's exciting when that happens. It's not the most common experience that I've had, but it's something to be cautious of, especially late in the season when they get a bit cranky. And all right, so the Max is asking, he knows the species is the eastern newt. Okay, yes, let me touch on that. The red spotted newt here, I've got the Latin name up on the screen, is Notophthalmus. Who coined that? That's a lot of consonants at once. Notophthalmus viridescens viridescens. The reason there's 3 names up there is because this is the subspecies. A lot of reptiles and amphibians have regionally discrete and visually distinct populations, that meet along small contact zones, but they're not reproductively isolated. So there's a lot of designations of subspecies in reptile and amphibian species. This is one of them. So the eastern newt is the name for the species, not a Thalamus viridescens. The eastern newt, though, includes other subspecies of the red spotted newt, like the central newt found in the Midwest and in northwestern Ontario, and the peninsula newt, which is found in Florida. Our species is the red spotted newt, which is defined by, there we go, having red spots on its back that are completely circled in black outlines. Now, this is an adult, and this is me holding it, which, again, you want to minimize doing this. I was lifting this up to put its log back, and then I put it right back down. Now, this adult newt was found on land, which is unusual because they usually live in shallow ponds. But in this case, the beaver pond where it had been living was draining. The dam broke. The beavers had moved on or died or something, and it had to move to another pond. So it was doing it over land, and it got part way there and sheltered under a log where I found it, and then it was probably going to keep making its migration that night after I left it alone. Newts are also known as adults that come out on rainy nights and forage on land for insects. So they're not completely aquatic, they just are preferably aquatic, and they have keeled tails that help them swim. And you can see that better here in this other adult, also found on land for some reason. You can see the keel in the tail there, which they don't have in the red F stage. That really helps them paddle through the water, where they do spend most of their time. You also see they're darker on top and brighter underneath. This is a form of camouflage. If you look down into the water, you see darker things. So if you're looking down at the newt, it blends in better. And if you're looking up from the bottom of a pond, if you're an ambush predator like a snapping turtle, you see bright light coming from the sky. And then the lighter underside of this animal helps it camouflage that way. A lot of fish do the same thing. All right. So that's the mud puppies, and that's the one newt that we have. And then there was a question there, are these not found north of the Ottawa River? Yeah, so all of the species that we're talking about tonight are found throughout the northern portion of the Ottawa district. So all of them can be found in Gatineau Park or in the Gatineau River, in the case of the mud puppy. I don't have good maps to show you for Quebec. The maps that are available for Quebec are really tiny, only show the entire province, even when the distribution is only in the little bottom portion of the province around Gatineau or Montreal. So it's not much to show, but something that is unusual is that all of these species are better known on the Quebec side of the river, especially in Gatineau Park, than they are on the Ontario side. It's sort of a reversal of what happens a lot of the time, but because wildlife research budgets and perspectives are shaped by provincial politics and provincial laws, there's this provincial focus on these studies, and southern Quebec has a lot of things that are marginal or rare species that get a lot of attention in Quebec, but that aren't significant in Ontario. So there's a lot more attention, in a sense, on these species, which are, unique aspects of southern Quebec in the context of Quebec as a province. Whereas in Ontario, they're more widespread species, and they don't get the same kind of attention right up to the Ottawa River or in Eastern Ontario. Now, this is blue spotted salamander. Now, this is one of several forest-dwelling species of salamanders that have a classic salamander life history that I'm going to show you. So the blue spotted salamander of all of these is probably the one you may encounter most often. These animals, they breed in ponds, they lay eggs, those hatch into little larvae. I'll show you a larva in a second. And then They develop into adults sometime during the year, and then they live most of their lives on land in forest floor litter, except for when they migrate back to ponds to breed. This is a pretty classic blue spotted salamander. They're a dark color that can be very dark, or they can be sort of a lighter medium gray. The spotting can vary tremendously on these guys. And the map I have for Ontario for these doesn't have the color coding for an unusual reason that I'm about to talk about, called the Ambustoma Unisexual Lineage. This might be too much herpetological inside baseball for some of you, but you're gonna hear about it if you start getting interested in these, where somebody tells you you can't know for sure that that's a blue spotted salamander, or you need to do DNA, and that's true and it's not, depending on the situation. So there's a group of these salamanders in this genus. I should mention this group of salamanders is called the Mole Salamander group. Mole because they're fossorial. They spend a lot of time underground, burrowing in tunnels. They're really using tunnels created by other animals. But the Mole Salamander group they have lungs. There's another group of salamanders coming up that don't have lungs at all. But once these guys have gills as larvae, but then once they're adult, they actually have functional lungs. Now, 4 of these species, the blue spotted salamander, the Jefferson salamander, the smallmouth salamander, and the tiger salamander, in different places across eastern and midwestern North America, have a number of species complexes, sort of. There are lineages of salamanders that live with the pure species that are made up genetically of a mix of genes from 2, or in some cases more than 2, of these 4 species. This complex of species, they're not hybrids. And each one of these lineages is sort of genetically isolated, and most studies have shown that they're quite old. The balance of evidence of all of the work that's been done on these suggests that the unisexual lineages are actually millions of years old. Unisexual salamanders are nearly all female. They are triploid, meaning they have 3 sets of chromosomes rather than 2. And in the typical cases, 2 of those genes will be from one species, and 1 of those genes, or sets of chromosomes, I should say, not genes, there's more than 3 genes. 2 sets of chromosomes will come from one of the species and 1 set from a second species. The most common 2 complexes of these are what we call the LLJ. That's 2 sets of chromosomes from a blue spotted salamander and 1 from a Jefferson. And the LJJ, which is the other way around, 2 sets from a Jefferson and 1 from a blue spotted. Like I said, they're nearly all female. There's been a couple of cases where a male triploid has been found. That's a very unusual case. And there's also cases where salamanders have been found that have 4 or 5 sets of chromosomes, but these are again rare and unusual, and believed to regress to being triploids within a generation or 2. What's interesting is that these are functional lineages. They're not parthenogenic, meaning the female doesn't just make more clones of herself like some species do. They don't have males, but they need a spermatophore, male genetic material from one of the pure species in order to lay fertile eggs, even though they don't incorporate any genetic material from that male. So they don't meet the definition of species. They're not like organisms that mate with like organisms that produce like offspring. They don't. They make with unlike organisms and don't use that genetic material, but somehow need it at the same time. It's very bizarre. It really challenges a lot of our definitions of species concepts. And in a sense, the unisexual lineage that lives alongside the pure species is a kind of the scavenger of genetic material, or a parasite for reproductive material for the pure species. Field studies show that the pure species, if you know they're pure species, like in a blind test, can be distinguished 100% of the time. And that the dependent unisexual, so the LLJ that depends on blue spotted salamander genetic material for reproduction, generally will look like a blue spotted salamander. And if you have one, you will generally think it's a blue spotted salamander, but it's not possible to separate the pure species from its dependent unisexual, only from the other species. So it gets a little muddy, and there are some of these unisexuals that are obviously not one or the other species, but it's not clear what they are. All this to say, this is a blue spotted salamander, or a blue spotted salamander dependent unisexual. We don't actually know unless we test it. The convention in field herpetology in Ontario is to take a clearly identifiable specimen like this that meets all of the characteristics of being a blue spotted salamander, and we just call it a blue spotted salamander. And the thing about or a unisexual is implied, because otherwise it takes too long to write this down every time you find one. There are some other weird and complex situations. Pelee Island is a mess, but there's also sometimes some clues. If you find a male in the springtime with swelling around the cloaca, well, the swelling is what can indicate that it's a male. And if that's the case, it's a pure member of the species. So it's not a unisexual for sure. Also, the unisexuals, like any instance of polyploidy, they tend to be larger than the pure species, the so-called pure species with the 2 sets of chromosomes. And also there's differences in the eggs. This is an egg mass of a pure blue spotted salamander. That identification was confirmed by Francis Cook for me a few years ago. Blue spotted salamanders, when it's a pure union, so to speak, will lay their eggs in this sort of cylindrical shape along an object, like a submerged stick in this case. The blue spotted salamander dependent unisexual will lay fewer eggs, they'll be larger eggs, and they're in kind of an irregular glob most of the time. Now, if you see things like this in the springtime, that could be frog eggs or salamander eggs, and there's some ways to tell them all apart, but it's better to just find an adult. Now, there's one more Ambistoma that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's this one. There's more Ambistomas than that, but they're all found in the States, not here. This one is great because it's not a participant in this awful genetic complex that very few people understand. This is the spotted salamander, Ambustome immaculatum. It's always a treasure to find one of these, no matter how many you've found before. A spotted salamander is the largest terrestrial salamander in our area, and they can get quite large, but they're rarely seen. They're extremely fossorial. They spend a lot of their time underground, and it's very rare to find them outside of the early spring or the late fall. They're also, despite that, based on the surveys that have been done, they seem to be pretty uncommon or rare in our area. They're one of the first to kind of disappear if a forest is heavily disturbed and it loses those ephemeral pond breeding features. These guys tend to disappear and not come back, whereas the blue spotted salamanders seem to manage to come back. I'm going to just have a look at what's in the chat question here. Okay. Max, if you were asking, aren't they poisonous though, about the newts? Yes, newts are poisonous. All salamanders are technically a little bit poisonous. They can all make a secretion that's quite toxic if they're disturbed and anxious and feel threatened. If you ever feel it, if you have a salamander that you found, a spotted or blue spotted salamander, and it starts putting its head down in front of itself, sort of like rubbing the ground with its face, and waving its tail in the air, the chances are that at the same time it's doing that, it's secreting this special goopy, gluey white slime that it can make. That stuff is incredibly sticky and incredibly toxic if you lick it. So don't. That doesn't happen too often if you find one and handle it gently or a very limited amount, but once in a while you get one that's easily agitated and they'll give you a full-blown defensive display. That's really designed to deter birds and snakes, especially snakes. So, and Rob Alvo has answered a question for me about spotted salamander eggs. I'll show you a clump in a second. And actually, no, it shouldn't be called the yellow spotted salamander. We often say that just to be clear because we have a blue spotted salamander. The official standard English name of this species is just the spotted salamander. I agree, it's yellow spotted, but it has a matching turtle. We have a turtle in our area called the spotted turtle that's black with yellow spots. So I guess they're a matching set. Yeah, it's quite common to see yellow spotted used as the name, but the official name, according to the official standardized list from the Society for the Study of Amphibians and Reptiles, is just spotted salamander. Not agreeing or disagreeing or trying to say that that's clear, but that's how it is. Now, I have to get back to the slideshow. There we go. So there's the map of where they're known from on the Ontario side. They are found throughout Gatineau Park. They might be easier, honestly, to find in Gatineau Park than in Ontario. In the city of Ottawa, as it's known, there are very few places where they actually turn up. There's a lot of forest in this space here where they just don't seem to be present. There are a couple of dots, though, not on this map yet. Conservation Committee activities of the OFNC have found new populations or previously unknown populations of them in Cumberland Forest and in the Greenbelt in Orleans. But I'm not aware of anyone turning one up in the Mare Bleu complex to date. This yellow dot is a stony swamp population that was only also confirmed in the last few years. And as you can see, the few other squares on here, these are 10 by 10 kilometer grid squares, by the way. It's a standard grid square used by National Resource Canada mapping and also by bird breeding atlases. So that's why they've adopted this structure for the reptile maps. But only one population that was known historically is known to persist currently up past Dunrobin, that green square there, and then other populations known historically have not been re-documented recently. Doesn't mean they're gone, although I bet those two in the middle are along the Rideau right in town. So like I was saying, it's always a pleasure to find these. This was a large adult spotted salamander found in Cumberland Forest. This is the one I mentioned that was discovered in Cumberland Forest earlier this year, in fact. They all have a little bit different spotting. This is big paint dauber marks on it. It's quite a nice one. And what happened here was unfortunate and fortunate. So I moved a big maple log that looked solid and it broke in half. If I had known it would break in half, I wouldn't have moved the log. Occasionally these accidents happen. So that's why there's wood splinters everywhere. They're moist, at least, they're not sharp. But this salamander was in the middle of that log. So unfortunately, I broke his log. I tried my best to put it back together afterwards, but fortunately, we now know that this species inhabits that public forest. That can help us maybe ensure that potential breeding ponds are not disrupted by any other activities that are occurring there. Let's see. Oh, here's some eggs. This is a clump of spotted salamander eggs. See, they're also attached to a branch the way the blue spotted did, but they're numerous small eggs, and they're in a globular clump, and they're submerged. You might find large globular clumps of eggs floating in ponds around the same time of year in mid to late April. If they're floating and there's lots of them in one place, you're probably looking at wood frog eggs. But a single clump on a submerged branch like this is pretty classic spotted salamander egg clump. Now, no, the photo's not under ice. It's just there's some schmutz, I guess, on top of the water, and some reflections that make it look that way. However, surface freezing of these ponds does happen from time to time. So there's two different strategies here that amphibians use. The submerged egg clump, like you see here, is one that won't freeze. If the surface of that pond freezes overnight, the eggs won't freeze. That's security from cold weather. But it might also slow the development of those eggs because they're down deeper in colder water, and the development of the larva might happen more slowly. That's the trade-off. Wood frogs have these large clumps of eggs that float near the top. When the ponds freeze, because they don't always, but when they do, some of the eggs at the tops of those clumps do die. The trade-off benefit is that the eggs that don't die, or in years where it doesn't freeze, those eggs are up at the top, they warm faster, the surface water warms faster, they're in the sun, and those larvae can develop more quickly. Now, how large is large? Erwin asked me, how large is large? On metric or imperial? Spotted salamanders can be very big, approaching, not quite, but approaching a foot. So 10 inches or 25 centimeters is known in some large adults. They're also very long lived. So if you find one that happens to be quite large, they're probably quite old. They're known to live over 20 years in the wild, at least. And it's very difficult to definitively age a salamander. They don't have rings like a tree or anything like that, but they live quite a long time because they have this cryptic lifestyle. They don't have a high rate of predation as an adult. This is similar to population strategies that we see in turtles and snakes and a lot of reptiles and amphibians, really, just not frogs. Frogs have explosive breeding and short lives, but salamanders, the larvae have a tough go. A lot of eggs get eaten, a lot of larvae get eaten, a lot of little ones get eaten. But if you are a salamander and you make it to being a full-size adult, your risk of predation decreases quite a bit. Now, here's a larva. This is a better developed larva. This one didn't just hatch, but you might notice that it looks a bit similar to that mud puppy we saw. There's that sort of proto-salamander influence in there. Most salamander larvae look quite similar. Basically, it's like a long tadpole with a feathery mane. Those are gills. You can see the legs are there when they hatch. When they're young and smaller than this, they don't have the legs. They swim around like they're sort of tadpole shaped, but plus gills. And as they get larger, they start to grow legs and they start to sort of slowly transform into a more adult-like shape. Those gills will recede or be resorbed. And then at some point, not too long after this time here, this photo was taken in July. This little guy here would start to look like a miniature adult salamander, and he'd crawl off into the forest and forage there for a number of years. And then once he's larger and sexually mature, he'll start moving back to the pond every spring or most springs to breed. Getting a lot of questions. So yes, this is a spotted salamander larva. It's not easy to see in this picture. I don't know, maybe the next picture, I have another view of it. It's not the easiest to see in the photos I'm showing you here, but there are some yellow flecks starting to show up there where I'm putting my mouse cursor. Yeah, so spotted or yellow spotted, as you will, in this case. If you don't start to see adult features in a more later developed larva like this, they can be very difficult to identify. Very difficult. And that's even with only 7 species to choose from. If you put a dip net in a stream in North Carolina, good luck. Good luck to you. It's very, very hard to sort out the adults, let alone the larvae down there. But these are kind of neat. And this is a young one. It's a more recently transformed one. If your zoom window is not blocking your view of it, over here on the right side, there's a millipede, a regular millipede, not a giant forest one, a regular little tiny one. If that gives you an impression of size for this young salamander here. And you can see some fungal structures there, some mycelium in there. Here's another slightly larger but still young one that's found a lot to eat. And I probably overdid the photos of these, but they're really a striking species, and they're adorable, and they kind of have this permanent smile on their face. And it's always a joy to find one, whether it's your first or your 400th. It's always wonderful to find this species because it happens so infrequently. And what's really fun is if you turn over, say, this fur log here and you find more than one species. This was the spotted salamander, confirming their presence in the ravines in the Orleans Greenbelt. That was discovered last year, even though that's been surveyed multiple times. The salamander on the left is one that you're more likely to find more often turning over logs in forests. That is, and now I'm going to get confusing on everyone, an eastern red-backed salamander. So spotted, yellow spotted, that's nothing. That is a red-backed salamander. Yep. Go red at all. This is the most typical form of the eastern red-backed salamander in most of our area. It's called the lead-back phase. They have 2 common color phases. And in the east side of Ottawa, if you're east of the Rideau River, and in a lot of the areas south of Ottawa, even south of Ottawa and west of the Rideau River, there are large areas where, for some reason, if you do find the species at all, this is the only form that you will see. The common name, whoops, I'll show you the other morph in a second. I guess the common name refers to the other color morph, which is generally speaking the more common one. The Latin name, Plethodon cinereus, refers to the leadback form. The first one ever collected and described to scientific literature was a leadback. So cinereus is Latin, it means ashy. It refers to that color phase. The Plethodon genus is interesting in a couple of ways. This is one of the lungless salamanders. So these guys, they have, once they're adults, they don't develop lungs like the other salamanders do. They just only breathe through their skin. This is one of the many reasons why it's important not to, it's important for the ones with lungs too, don't get me wrong, but if you have like a bunch of hand lotion on and you hold this, it's like suffocating because its skin is its membrane for breathing. I mean, it's covered in some kind of goo or lotion from you, it can't breathe. This salamander, this genus is interesting. It's the only member of its genus that we have in our area, but it is the only one of our 7 species that doesn't breed in the water. They have an interesting adaptation. So I gotta talk about this a little bit because it's a very, very important species in ecology. There's a study done on these in a forest in New Hampshire. They found that they're so abundant, even if they're harder to find and rarely seen, they're so abundant in this forest that the total biomass of all of the red-backed salamanders in that forest exceeded the total biomass of all of the other vertebrates in the forest combined. So in other words, if you took every bird, every mammal, every reptile, and all of the other amphibians, put them on a scale together from 1 acre of that forest, and beside them on a different scale, you put all of the redback salamanders from that same acre of forest, the redback salamanders would weigh more. These are small. These are the size of your finger. The large, like if you have a, I'm a pretty big guy, but my middle finger here is a large adult. They aren't very big. 12 centimeters is doing well. But they are so abundant, naturally abundant in healthy, mature forests, that their rate of predation on invertebrates in the leaf litter regulates the rate of decomposition in the forest soil. So if they weren't there, all of the little millipedes and slugs and other critters that digest all of the forest detritus would do so much faster because they're not being predated. That would result in faster nutrient turnover and a heavier, denser soil. Because they're present, that decomposition takes longer. It's a slower process. There's more carbon in that cycle. That's an interesting thing. And the soil you get is this really rich, spongy stuff. If you've been in a healthy, mature forest and you felt that cushy, spongy feeling, these salamanders have a lot to do with regulating that, even though we don't even see them. So if you take a farm field and you plant trees on it, it might start to look like a forest, but until salamanders can return there, it may not really function as a healthy forest in the understory. That's going to change the environment for a lot of the forest understory plants, the germination conditions for them, also the conditions for a lot of the fungi that network with the roots of all of the trees. Salamanders are, as a group, and especially in our area, especially this species, really, really important keystone species to forest ecology because they're abundant too. They're also a lot of food source for a lot of small animals and part of the food web. The trouble, of course, is that if they're eliminated because of clear cutting or because of acid rain, they don't necessarily return immediately. And if the forest is fragmented, if there's large open plowed fields and roads and things in the way, they're not going to recolonize things that are coming back. So this is one of those things where even though overall it's a common species, their conservation is important. They're a common species where we have to ensure they stay common so that we have broader ecological health. Now, I mentioned the two color phases. This is the first look I'm giving you of the redback color phase, which in most places is the more common one. It's not different than the gray squirrel. We're all used to seeing squirrels, I think. There are gray ones and there are black ones, and they're color phases of the same species, and one litter can contain both. And most of the time, in most places, that's true of this species. A litter or a group of eggs of this species can contain morphs of both phases. Now, again, there are areas around us that are only leadback, and we don't entirely know why. On the Quebec side of the Ottawa River, throughout Gatineau Park, they're fairly easy to find, and the leadback is present, but the redback is far more common. There are a few spots in West Ottawa where there's healthy forest where these are abundant, and the redback is most common. Most of the places that do have them at all, south and east of Ottawa, they're hard to find. They're apparently rare, and the only one you ever find is the leadback. There's a lot of research happening, a lot of studying has been done, a lot of different ways of profiling why the proportion of these two morphs is different in different places, what the advantages are. And that could be several talks in a series all by itself. So it's not resolved as an answer. We do know that soil acidification is or was a threat to them. Thankfully, we've largely solved the acid rain problem in our area, but this could be bit of a historical relic of that, because some studies have shown that the redback morph is more sensitive to soil acidification, although the species as a whole is vulnerable to it. That could maybe be one of the reasons, but again, it's hard to say. The thing is, there's areas in our forested areas in our region where this species is extremely rare or absent altogether. In most of stony swamp, for some reason, there's none. The reason there is probably because most of stony swamp, if you know this part of the greenbelt, was farmed. It was agriculture and then replanted. So the species likely disappeared and then has simply not been able to recolonize the forest now that it looks like a forest again. Trying to get the chat because it looks like I got some more questions. All right. Yeah, so Jonathan says he's found salamanders about a dozen times now, and all but one were eastern redback salamanders. That's very normal. Honestly, I think at 10 to 1, you're doing well on the other species there, Jonathan. Could they be reintroduced? That's a good question. Maybe. Reintroductions of reptiles and amphibians generally isn't something that's been widely developed or explored. I'm going to say yes, it's possible. Just we have to learn how and think about conservation of these sorts of places in a more holistic way in terms of how to provide a complete ecology for all of the species there. How much territory do they need? These, not very much, although they will defend territory. These species, especially when they have eggs, but even not, will defend a rock or a log or whatever their shelter object of choice is, will chase away other salamanders that aren't in their social group. They do apparently have a small social group. So if you're friends, yeah, hey, come into my log. But hey, you, I don't know who you are, get out of my log. These are fascinating. Fascinating as a species. And what Rob's saying there in the chat, 400 meters around the breeding pond. Typically, yeah, that's the distance for the species that breed in ponds. It's generally thought that they need to be within 400 meters of a pond suitable for breeding in order to be present in the forest. So one of the reasons why this species is important, go away chat, why the species is important is because they don't require a pond. So if the pond has been eliminated or there simply isn't a suitable breeding site, this salamander becomes the salamander of that forest. This is another leadback phase here. I was showing you a redback on a log. Oh, and here's some eggs. So there was a log here. I lifted it up, and this salamander here is guarding her eggs. The females will guard their eggs, and then these little white grape-like things here, I think I have a closer shot of them. Yep. As they mature, they'll turn clear, and before they hatch, you actually can see the little larva wriggling inside the egg. What happens next in this species is that they complete the entire larval phase inside the egg, and when they hatch from the egg, they're extremely tiny, but they're in their adult body. They don't have to do a larval phase outside the egg, and that's how this species skips the pond. This isn't the smallest of small ones, but that's my thumb, and that's the juvenile. That is very, very tiny. That thing in front of my thumb, by the way, is a scale from white cedar. You have a, everyone knows white cedar, I think. If you have a hedge, it's probably that. Just for context here, since you can't look at my thumb, I can, but you can't. You know, they're quite small. They do grow up into adults. Again, here's a typical one, here's a typical one. And there are the two main color phases, but in fact, there aren't just two color phases. There's some weird ones. I'm gonna leave this slideshow for just a second. Uh-oh, not yet. And just show you, I think people can see this. This is the PDF article. Jean-David Moore and Martin Ouellet published this a few years ago in the Canadian Field Naturalists. That is the academic journal published by the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club. For over 100 years, we've been publishing scientific literature on natural history, on Canadian ecology and Canadian species. And they published this article really properly and finally delineating all of the color variations in the eastern redback salamander. It turns out there are actually 8 color phases, although most of them are rare. I'll go back to the slideshow. This one is technically a leadback, but you can see the speckling there is starting to imitate where the red band is. And the reflectiveness of this doesn't come through in the photograph, but this is an iridistic salamander, as in it displays iridescence in its spots. This was kind of a cool thing to find. This one is partially erythristic, meaning it has an abundance of red pigment. You can see that outside of the red band and all around it here. Unfortunately, I didn't get a better, closer photo of this one. Find out I was at home and this was somewhere hiding in the forest. Outside of where the red band is, you can see all of these red blotches and red pigment showing up, and even the legs up here are red. It's not a full bright red. There are some populations in the northeastern United States and in the Maritimes of Canada where you have fully erythristic redback salamanders. They're just like screaming bright orange red, which is pretty cool to see. This one's found in Ottawa and partially erythristic, which is neat. And this one, this was fun for me. This is not an albino. This is amelanistic. This salamander is lacking its melanin pigment. It has no melanin at all. There are albinos known in the species, but this was a wild salamander. This was found in Ottawa, somewhere in the West End. I'm not going to say exactly where, but you can see that the amelanistic form of this is actually the striped morph. You can see where the red stripe would be, and the lighter color on the side. It's just all of the black pigment is just sucked right out of there, or it didn't form. It's genetic variation, and it's pretty cool. Now, the CFN article that I just showed you did a thorough literature review, and they found that the amelanistic morph here has only been recorded 5 times. So this is the 6th, and I didn't realize how few times it had been recorded until last night when I was reviewing this before talking tonight. And I think I should probably write that up. So that's the 6th one recorded apparently ever. So that's pretty cool. But there's more than just bizarre looking salamanders of this one common species. There's some very beautiful salamanders of some very unusual species that you may see from time to time. Now, before I tell you what this is, let's get Zoom to tell me what people are asking me. Okay, so do they hiss? No, they don't hiss. Yes, lots of animals hiss at intruders when they get close to their eggs. That is true, but not salamanders. They don't really make sound. The 2 salamanders in the egg photo, yeah, that there were actually 3 salamanders under that log with where I used for the egg photo a few moments ago. But sometimes you get communal nesting with females. It's likely that all of the salamanders that I found under there were females, and the others may have had eggs nearby in crevice under the soil I couldn't see, or maybe inside the log that I lifted. But there is some communal behavior that has been documented in that species, or some gregarity, if you will. Generally speaking, that falls on gender lines. But do I have a picture of a baby leadback? I don't. I don't, but if you found one on the old quarry trail, that would be very, very cool, because I have never found any individual of that species in that neck of the woods. All right, so back to the presentation. This one is a favorite of mine. See, now I'm so used to doing sort of in-person talks. I want to ask, and everyone's muted and I can't hear. But this is I'll just say it's a four-toed salamander. It's a silly name because you don't need to count its toes to identify it. It's very hard to count a salamander's toes. As you may imagine, it's called four-toed salamander because it has 4 toes on the back feet, not the front. Front have 5. The back feet have 4. One of the reasons why counting toes, even if you could, is discouraged is because salamanders can just lose a toe, be without a toe, and then, you know, it had 5 and now it's 4, and that's not really what distinguishes the species. It's just what stood out to whoever picked the name whenever that happened. They have this very interesting pattern on them. If you flip this upside down, I've never managed to get a photo of this that isn't very, very blurry, because these are very small. They're 5 to 6 centimeters long most of the time when you find them. They're very small as adults, and they're small and squirmy, so to have one upside down and take a picture of it, it's not the easiest thing to do. But their belly is bright white with black speckles. It's this very clear salt and pepper pattern that's very different than the belly of anything else in their area. But they also have that squared off nose, and they have a very sort of, you can see all these striations on their back at certain angles. Now, they're very poorly known in our area, not on the map. They are known in Gatineau Park. They are known north of Montebello, in the Canuck Reserve area. But generally speaking, they're poorly known in our area. Now, there is one record, recent record from Stony Swamp that isn't on this map. So that's here, but that hasn't been repeated, but they may well be there. And then I saw one 4-toed salamander this year. It's not in a place that's on the map. It was closer to Kingston, but it was also not a known population. These are really special whenever they show up. The interesting thing about their breeding habitat that might be what restricts them into being a sort of a local species is, or localized species, what I'm trying to say, is that they very particularly lay their eggs in moist moss, usually sphagnum moss, overhanging water. When the egg hatches, the larva sort of wriggles out of the egg and falls down and plops into the water in these very shallow, boggy, pooly things. So that very specific breeding pond type of habitat isn't present in a lot of forests, at least not anymore. Although at one time, you know, shallow boggy wetlands were probably a lot more common, and in many cases we've just drained those, and those places are now farm fields. Anyway, this is another view of one. You can sort of see on the back the ridges there, or the striations, if you will. They look less moist, I guess, than other salamanders typically do. They have a bit of a wardiness to them, even though they don't have the moisture resistance that newts do. And this was my cover image from the beginning of the slide. This was the one I found this year. This isn't from our area, but it was a particularly large and particularly striking individual. It was also completely unexpected when I found it. The log this animal was hiding under was barely a log. It was the outside veneer of what used to be a small log that had been completely eaten away by these small ants. and it was teeming in ants. I lifted it up and set it to the side, and this guy had just been sitting there snacking on ants all day. I guess he had a pretty good buffet going, so took the photo and left him to that. Now, you have a look at this pattern. You've got the dark back and the speckles and the band and the light sides, and then here we've got a, dark sides and the light back and speckles and a band, and it's what's going on. So this is another unusual and interesting species in our area, and it's also the only representative of a very large group, ecologically speaking, of salamanders that is quite diverse, not too far away from us. So this is now the northern two-lined salamander. I'm fascinated by the species and its distribution, and I'll show you why in a second. It's generally found across our region. It's known to be in small, piddly little brooks and in the Ottawa River and in any sort of water in between, as long as it's flowing water. It seems to prefer to be in some sort of linear flowing water type situation. Although in New York State, there are places where it just lives in a lake. Yeah, so it's well known to be in the Rideau system, in the Ottawa system, and in the Mississippi River watershed. And it's also very easy to find in Gatineau Park. All of the little streams and brooks in there seem to have these guys in the Gatineau River. I found this by accident looking for snails a few years ago in the snail workshop that the OFNC had over there. So this was in Gatineau Park. It's called the northern two-line salamander because of those two bands along the sides, although the only salamander that has a feature. They're generally long and slender, and they have a flattened tail because they live in and around streams, and they lay their eggs on the underside of stones in the water, in the flowing water of streams. Here's a more brassy colored one along a larger river with a rocky stream shoreline, I should say. And this is a juvenile. Now that's my index finger. So this is only 2 and a bit centimeters long. And you can still see some gill features here. And I'm crouched in a stream to look for these. This is a small juvenile. It's just over 1 centimeter long. You can see its gills are folded back against its head here, and it's got a spotting pattern, which can be confusing, and a tail that's very, very keeled there to be a paddle. And here's an even tinier one. It's less than 1 centimeter in length. I had to scoop the goop to lift it up carefully or safely. It's just sort of hoping that I think it's part of the goop and put it back down, which I did, of course. So if you see a salamander that's that size on land under a log in the forest, you've found a redback salamander baby, and it'll be either all dark or dark with a little red band. In that case, the body structure of these guys is quite similar to the redback salamander, and even though they have a different genus, they are actually quite closely related. Now, talk about why this is fascinating to me in terms of the distribution. In just a sec, once I, come on Zoom, answer those questions. Oh, more just, yes, I agree, it is very cute. They're very interesting to find. The Streamside Salamanders as an ecological group, just south of us, if you just cross into New York State a short distance, there are 4 species of streamside salamanders. These are different than the woodland salamanders. So I would say a woodland salamander would be either the redbacks that breed in moist logs in the forest and don't use ponds, or the ones that are more classic, where they move to a breeding pond and breed there and then live in the forest floor for most of their life. The streamside salamanders live in flowing streams. generally in forested situations as well. And then in the vicinity of those streams, you can find them away from the stream, but usually not too far in forest that surrounds them. But they're really closely associated with these flowing waters, these more oxygenated waters. And they do all of their breeding and growth in there, like those larvae that I was, or not, yeah, larvae of the young two-line salamanders I was showing you. Now, this is the general gist of their distribution in Ontario, and what I can't show you in Quebec is that they're found generally throughout the adjacent area of Quebec, and they go very, very far north in Quebec, almost to James Bay. They're incredibly widespread in this part of Eastern Canada. They don't get that much farther west than that in Ontario, but that could be a question of forest moisture. But they have this pretty well-defined southern limit here that corresponds more or less to the southern limit of the Canadian Shield. And most of the southern stations that are known, are only historic records. They haven't been relocated in recent times. The reason why, to me, this is fascinating is because not only do we only have one member of the Streamside Salamander group in our forests, it has come to this dead stop when you hit Southern Ontario. It's quite possible that that's because that Southern Ontario, where you see it's absent there, is much more heavily developed, much more heavily farmed. There's just that much, the habitat alteration and loss there has been so much more extreme that there may just not be anywhere left that's good for it. If we had a time machine, we could check. But it's odd because there's a lot of species that have been largely extirpated from that part of the province, but they still hang on in pockets here and there, or we still have a record or two. We got nothing on this species. Now compare that to its distribution in New York State. My next slide is data from the New York State Amphibian and Reptile Atlas. Except for Long Island, it's found throughout New York State. In every ecoregion, it's found in the St. Lawrence Valley and in the Lake Ontario Plain, right up to the Ontario border. And to be fair, right there adjacent to the St. Lawrence River is where this cluster of Ontario records is. But it's found south of Lake Ontario and well south climatically. It's not like it's a southern climatic limit for the species. And if I put up a map of Pennsylvania with similar data, you would see that it's found throughout Pennsylvania. Of the streamside salamanders, this species is the most tolerant of disturbance and the most tolerant of a loss of canopy. It'll be found in streamside sites that aren't totally forested. But for some reason, on the other side of that lake, it's not in much of southern Ontario, which is absolutely bizarre. And I have to wonder, it may not be the case, it may be historic habitat loss, it may be some other reason, but I have to wonder as if the reason is because we never look. Because my experience in our area is that every time I look for these, I find them. Ontario herpetologists and herp enthusiasts are so familiar with woodland salamanders, I don't think we change our search protocols often enough. We don't find a stream, we don't seek it out, and we don't move along it. Now I'm putting up the more localized map again because this yellow dot, that was me. I found that one a few years ago. That wasn't on the map before. And since then, I found them in a couple of other watersheds where they haven't been found. Very exciting for me. Larva that I was showing you were actually from Greens Creek, right here, right in the east end of the city. I can walk there from my house, and we've speculated about the presence of them there. Looks like a kind of a habitat, but no one's ever done it. But I found a spot and searched, and there they were, just like that, in July of this year. And then more recently, while we were conducting a unrelated survey as part of the Conservation Committee's work in Voyageur Provincial Park over here at the end of Ontario, we found this. Owen Clargan, who's listening in here, and I were crossing a small ravine, and I made an offhand comment about how it looked like the kind of ravine where I had found one at a different place. As we were crossing the stream, I moved a single log, and this is the muddy crevice that was where the log had been sitting, and this salamander was just right there. And it was very cooperative. It swam into the stream and sat on this log for us, just posing. So not only the first record for a generally well-surveyed provincial park, but the easternmost record in the province of Ontario. It seems like the pattern we see in a lot of the work that we're doing is that a lot of sites have populations of not just salamanders, but other reptiles and amphibians that are unrecorded in our area, which makes it hard to make appropriate conservation decisions about the site or about managing natural areas in our region generally if we don't know what's there. And with the exception of a small number of people like the late Francisco and Fred Schuler, who's done a ton of stuff in certain areas, there's almost no search effort in Eastern Ontario, which is why the last thing I really want to encourage everybody to do is to join iNaturalist and report your sightings of salamanders if you find them, but also of everything. iNaturalist, if you don't use it, is a citizen science platform online. You go to inaturalist.ca, and your observations of everything, plants, animals, if it's a living thing, you can put up what you saw, and it becomes an actual record of that species in this database. And collectively, if we all contribute our sightings, we have a much better geospatial understanding of where species live and how they're doing. So, got a question here. Do I think the Orleans ravine could be suitable for Eurycia bislineata? The Eurycia bislineata is the Latin name for the two-line salamander, and yes, I do think the ravine could be suitable for it, and it should be watched for there. The trouble there is that that stream is partially buried. It drains naturally through the forest, and then it hits some of the development on the floodplain in Orleans, not the current floodplain, the flat part of Orleans there along like St. Joseph. And the stream network is funneled into culverts that go underground and under that development. And that might be a deterrent for their presence, although they could be hanging on in the upper reaches. Another important question is what was the case historically there. Some of that agriculture on the adjacent uplands had heavy pesticide use in the past that could have negatively affected them. If there was pollution or siltation or too much acidification when acid rain was a problem, that could have reduced them as well. But it's certainly possible, and it's definitely worth looking for them there. All right, so that's all that's in the slideshow. I did say that I showed you that. I will stop sharing my screen now, and I will hold up. If you're on speaker view, you can see this better. Trail and Landscape from 1981, and the article by Francis Cook at the time. That's our baseline, basically. If you're wondering about field guides, the best field guide for our area for Ontario, and it incidentally covers every species that's in Quebec as well. This thing is great. This is the photo field guide to the reptiles and amphibians of Ontario. It's got a picture of a musk turtle. And this is published by the St. Thomas Field Naturalists. You can get it from them directly or from the Algonquin Park bookstore. If you want more natural history information, the Amphibians and Reptiles of the Great Lakes region is excellent. This is the first edition. It's like got a green cover now. It's been revised and republished just recently, so it should be easy to find. And if you want really, really nicely done in-depth information about the species that are found here and the ones found just very close to us across the St. Lawrence River, I really highly recommend the Amphibians and Reptiles of New York State. If you can find this book, it's very well done, very detailed, and you can learn about a lot more about the species that occur both there and here, as well as species that you might see if you go a short distance south. You know, at some point in the future, of course, once things are normal again and the borders open and all that. Now, with that said, people have questions. I think you should be able to unmute yourself and ask, and I'll check the chat here for some questions. So iNaturalist has limitations. Yeah, every platform has limitations, of course. There is a community of people on iNaturalist that really try to review and vet the reptile and amphibian records to sort of clean that data, so to speak. But its benefits outweigh its drawbacks far and away. And the scientific community does use iNaturalist. Right now, in many jurisdictions, including in Ontario, if you find a rare species reporting has moved online through iNaturalist. The Natural Heritage Information Center encourages you, has always encouraged you to report sightings and observations of rare tracked or endangered species in Ontario. But now, instead of using a paper form and mailing it to them, or this really clunky online form thing they used to have, they have an iNaturalist project. So you put your observation on iNaturalist, put all of the relevant data in, the details there, and add it to their project, and they snag the information that way. Also, the residual data collection from the Ontario Reptile and Amphibian Atlas has moved to using an iNaturalist platform. And there's all kinds of data collection projects for various scientific agencies on there. The Canadian Wildlife Federation has a turtle project. They gather turtle data on there. There's an ongoing project on road mortality. So if you find something run over, as unfortunate as that is, it can be valuable data for mitigation of those road things. You can add that observation to this Wildlife on Roads in Ontario project, and that goes into a giant database to try and reduce the impact of roads on wildlife, which very disproportionately affects reptiles and amphibians. Yeah, it's quite valuable. Does anyone else have questions at all? You can type them in, or just take your mute off and ask.
Jacob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, this is Rob. I was just wondering how many people we actually had tonight, because I could see 7. I could see 7 people.
We were up to 36 at one point. We're down to 30.
I saw 40.
40.
Did you? Oh, excellent. It was clear of that registered for sure, but we peaked at 40. That's very happy with that.
So why am I only seeing 7? Any idea?
I don't know. That's
okay.
That's the Zoom setting. You can click on gallery view and scroll through. Most people aren't using their video right now, so they can. So you know, I can't tell when they're bored or nodding off because I talked too long about unisexuals or something like that. So.
I know I've been on other chats and you can swipe the screen across and see more people. So unless you actually swipe it, you don't see them.
Ah, okay, thanks.
Or if you open the participants window, you can actually see.
Jacob, I have a question about Jefferson salamanders without going down too much of a rabbit hole.
I'll do my best.
I was just wondering if there is any, I don't know what you would call latent DNA from Jefferson salamanders in our part of our Ontario.
Okay, so in our area, what has been definitely documented is the pure blue spotted salamander and the LLJ complex, which is 2 lateral or blue spotted sets of chromosomes plus 1 Jefferson set of chromosome. I'll rabbit hole one thing here, and that's while we look at these as being dependent on particular species and being like a kind of a mix of a species, again, hybrid's not an appropriate term because these aren't produced by hybridization events, at least not recent hybridization events. These are ancient lineages. And all of the unisexual lineages, every single one, even the one that's all 4 species combined found in like Indiana, every single one of these unisexual lineages has mitochondrial DNA from the smallmouth salamander. So they really make no sense. But with that said, in our area, definitively, we have the LLJ, which is the blue spotted salamander dependent unisexual lineage, and the blue spotted salamander. Now, Jefferson and the Jefferson dependent unisexual, which is the LJJ complex, those are found in parts of Ontario. The closest place in the province of Ontario to us is Durham County, which is this side of Toronto, like north of Oshawa-ish. They are found in New York State. If you cross the St. Lawrence River, you can go a very short distance across and start finding Jeffersons and the Jefferson dependent unisexual complex. They have never been definitively found in the province of Quebec for unknown reasons. They come very, very close to the border. There are populations, known populations, extremely close to the Quebec border in a number of places, but they've never been found on the Canadian side there, as far as I'm aware, unless something happened in the last couple of years. You know, I find it odd because, again, salamanders are undersurveyed generally. The sampling in Eastern Ontario, the search effort rather, is very low. It's very poor. And the habitat alteration, the historic habitat destruction across most of Eastern Ontario is very high. So the chance of there being remnant or historic Jefferson or Jefferson dependent unisexual populations near us, it's impossible to say it's zero because we're so close. And in so many ways, the St. Lawrence River is not an ecological barrier for them. Other species can and do cross it. So, and at least certainly did historically, and again in the as the Champlain Sea drained in glacial history, most of the Great Lakes drainage happened through the Ottawa River Valley, which meant that was a smaller river than it is today at one point. So with that said, the very short answer to your question is no, but it's, I think, important to always be looking and considering the possibility. If you find a salamander that's phenotypically Jefferson or has a lot of strong Jefferson characteristics, I'd suggest that it's important that maybe be investigated a little more.
Okay, because what I was trying to get at was the Jefferson is a species at risk under the ESA, and they are provided protection. I'm just wondering how we would determine which salamander gets protection, or habitat protection, I should say, if we don't know if it's a Jefferson or blue spotted.
Yeah, so there was actually a research study done, not on the salamander, but on the herpetologist studying the salamander, because the idea is so weird here. And it found that, again, you can identify the pure species with complete accuracy, but as soon as the unisexuals are in there, it's difficult. So what that means is that if you have something that looks like a Jefferson salamander, it's either the Jefferson or the unisexual, but there's like a 95+% chance that if it is a unisexual, that it's dependent on Jefferson salamander DNA, which means they have to be present. So morphology isn't completely useless, but it most likely will need to be backed up with DNA analysis to be conclusive.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, so I have a written question here. I have a couple. Okay, growing up in Kingston, Nigel used to see black salamanders, which were up to 8 centimeters. Any idea what this would be? If it was this springtime, it could just be blue spotted salamanders. Sometimes in the spring, they get very, very dark and their spots can be appear muted. And I think that's just a way for them to retain heat when it's very cold and they're trying to get a lot done in terms of breeding activity with not a lot of energy. They are ectothermic, which we used to call cold-blooded, meaning they need to get all of their body heat from the environment. They don't generate their own. So absorbing heat is a good thing, and they sometimes will lighten up as the season warms up. But it also could be that you are finding one of the unisexual salamanders, the blue spotted dependent unisexuals, because sometimes or often they will have reduced spotting or some intermediate features. So if they're dark with little to no spotting, but not very big, that's maybe not completely perfectly blue spotted, but more blue spotted than Jefferson. So that suggests that's what that is. Camille wanted me to repeat what kind of habitat the four-toed salamander is found in. So as adults, they're found in forests, in forest floor habitat generally, just like the other salamanders. You just find them a lot less frequently. The breeding habitat is what's particular, and they need, they lay their eggs in moss that overhangs water. And it's almost always, not always, but almost always sphagnum moss overhanging water. These could be very, very shallow pools too. It's really incredible the little puddly kind of things that they will use. But mossy things overhanging water is as the feature, it's absent from a lot of disturbed or second growth forests. You need an older, healthier forest for that to have formed or reformed. They historically, probably that wasn't that picky, but for a modern salamander in the modern state of the world, that's kind of picky. So they end up being fairly localized. They're not technically considered a species at risk, although personal opinion, I think they're due for some assessment. Yeah. So unless there were any other questions, let's thank those of you who are still with us. Thank you for joining.